Please, human, the enemies want to take my mother. Help save her, begged the little girl, her large eyes reflecting the pale light of the alien moon. Cain froze, his muscled body tense with shock. The mother, his prey, cowered behind a boulder, breathing heavily, her green skin glistening with sweat. But it was the child who held his attention. Small, perhaps 7 in human years, with the same emerald skin as her mother, and eyes that bore into his soul. Please, she repeated, reaching a tiny hand toward him. You're not like them. I can tell. Cain's fingers instinctively moved to the metal collar around his neck. His prison, his leash, his death sentence. The toxin inside pulsed against his skin, a constant reminder of what would happen should he fail the Watchers. 3 years he'd worn it, ever since they dragged him from the ruins of the human settlement. 3 years of hunting down those who tried to escape in exchange for the weekly antidote that kept him alive. The collar was a masterpiece of cruelty. It contained 12 microchambers of toxin that would release into his bloodstream if he failed to return from a hunt or attempted to remove it without authorization. Only the Watcher's weekly antidote prevented the accumulated poison from killing him. He'd seen what happened to hunters who tried to escape, their bodies convulsing as the full dose flooded their system, death coming within minutes. Child, get back, the mother hissed, pulling her daughter behind her. He's one of them. He's their hunter. The girl, Mira, he had heard the mother call her, shook her head stubbornly. No, he has kind eyes, not like theirs. Cain almost laughed. Kind eyes? He hadn't been kind in 3 years, not since the Watchers had taken him during their raid on the human settlement. He'd been their dawang ever since, tracking down escapees from their labor camps, bringing them back for punishment, or worse. The alternative was death, a slow, agonizing death from the toxin in his collar. The Watchers had demonstrated it once on another human who tried to resist. 5 days of agony before merciful death. I have to take you back, he said, his voice hoarse from disuse. They're coming. They're always coming. The mother's eyes widened with terror. No, please, you don't understand what they do to us there. But he did understand. He'd seen the labor camps, seen the Nauru, these green-skinned natives of this world, worked until they collapsed, mining the precious metals the Watchers craved. He'd seen children like Mira separated from their parents, raised to serve, their spirits broken. He'd delivered countless fugitives back to that hell, always telling himself he had no choice. The collar made sure of that. They want to take my mother away, Mira said, her voice small but clear. Like they took my father. He never came back. Mother says he's gone to the stars. Something cracked inside Cain. Maybe it was the way she said it, with the same tone his own daughter might have used, back on Earth, before the invasion, before everything. How far behind are they? The mother asked, clutching her child. Close enough, Cain replied. An hour, maybe less. They're tracking me, and I'm tracking you. He touched the collar again, feeling the weight of it, the constant pressure of the tubes that fed poison into his veins in tiny controlled doses. Just enough to keep him dependent on their weekly antidote. Just enough to ensure his obedience. The Watchers had taken everything from him. His home, his family, his dignity. They'd turned him into something he despised, a predator who hunted his own kind, and the innocent Nauru who'd done nothing to deserve their enslavement. A decision crystallized in his mind, sudden and absolute. With shaking hands, he reached for the collar. Every captive knew the collar could be removed. But removal without the proper key triggered the release of all the toxin at once. Immediate death. Unless Cain had watched the Watchers enough to know there was a failsafe, a manual override. He'd spent months secretly observing their physicians when they administered his weekly antidote, memorizing their movements, studying the collar's design. If done correctly, it would remove the collar without releasing the toxin. But without regular antidote, the poison already in his system would kill him within a week. 7 days, maybe less. His fingers found the hidden catch. What are you doing? The mother gasped. Making a choice, Cain said and twisted. The collar clicked open. Pain shot through his neck as tiny needles withdrew from his flesh. But the full dose wasn't released. He threw the collar to the ground and crushed it beneath his boot. "They'll know," he said, already feeling lighter despite the death sentence he'd just given himself. "We need to move. Now." "Why?" the mother asked, suspicion in her eyes. "Why help us?" Kane looked at Mira, who watched him with complete trust. "Because your daughter reminded me I'm still human," he said simply. "And humans don't hunt children. Now move. I know a place, a settlement of free people. It's 6 days' journey from here. 6 days, if the poison didn't kill him first." "I'm Lyra," the mother said cautiously. "This is Mira." "Kane," he replied, "and we're wasting time." They traveled through the night, keeping to the densest parts of the strange purple forest that covered much of this region. Kane's trained eyes could see in the darkness better than most humans, an unexpected gift from the Watcher's experiments. The moons, twins that circled each other as they circled the planet, cast enough light to see by. The forest itself seemed alive with sounds and movements. Luminescent insects pulsed among the branches, casting eerie blue light across their path. Somewhere in the distance, a large creature howled, the sound echoing through the trees. "What was that?" Mira whispered, clutching her mother's hand. "Forest sentinel," Kane replied quietly. "Big predator. 4 legs, scales instead of fur. Hunts mostly at dawn and dusk. We're safe for now." "You know a lot about this world," Lyra observed. The Watchers made sure of it. A hunter needs to know the terrain, the wildlife, everything that might help or hinder a pursuit. Kane pushed aside a low-hanging branch. "They gave us enhanced vision, improved stamina, resistance to local diseases, made us into the perfect trackers." "And if you refused?" Lyra asked. Kane's expression darkened. There was no refusing. Those who tried didn't survive the augmentation procedures. Mira kept pace surprisingly well, though Kane could see her exhaustion. Lyra carried her when she couldn't walk anymore, but Kane knew they weren't moving fast enough. As they pressed deeper into the forest, Kane's enhanced hearing picked up a sound that made him freeze, the soft whirring of a Watcher hover drone. He signaled for silence, then gestured for Lyra and Mira to follow him into a hollow beneath the gnarled roots of a massive tree. "Stay down," he whispered. "Don't move. Don't even breathe heavily." The hover drone drifted through the forest canopy above them, its scanning beam cutting through the darkness in pulsing blue sweeps. These drones were the Watchers' eyes in places their patrols couldn't easily reach. Kane had used their data many times during hunts. The drone hovered directly overhead, its sensors probing the area. Kane tensed, ready to sprint and draw it away if necessary. Beside him, Mira trembled, and Lyra wrapped her arms protectively around her daughter. The scanning beam passed over their hiding place once, twice. Kane held his breath. Then the drone changed direction, continuing its programmed search pattern away from them. "That was close," Kane muttered when the sound had faded. "Too close. They've escalated the search already." "How could they find us so quickly?" Lyra asked. "The collar," Kane explained. "When I removed it, it would have sent a distress signal before I destroyed it. They know exactly where we started from." They continued moving, now with greater urgency. Kane set a punishing pace, aware that every minute could mean the difference between escape and capture. "You were a hunter for them," Lyra said as they picked their way through the underbrush. Not a question, but Kane answered anyway. 3 years, since they took our settlement. They killed most of us, but some they kept." He pushed aside a low-hanging branch. "The strongest, they turned into labor. The smartest, they experimented on. And some, like me, they made into hunters." "How many?" Lyra asked. "Human hunters? Maybe 20 when I was taken. Less now. The collars kill some. Others," he trailed off. "Others break in different ways." "And you?" Lyra pressed. "Why didn't you break?" Kane was silent for a long moment. "Who says I didn't?" They continued in silence after that, pushing deeper into the forest. Kane's thoughts drifted to the other hunters he'd known. Jackson, who'd thrown himself from a cliff rather than continue serving the Watchers. Elaine, who'd gone mad and attacked a Watcher patrol, dying under their shock staves. Only a few had lasted as long as he had. A sudden crack echoed through the forest. Kane froze, holding up a hand to stop Lyra and Mira. "What is it?" Lyra whispered. Patrol, Kane breathed, barely audible. Not following us yet. Random sweep. He pulled them behind a massive fallen tree trunk covered in luminous fungi. They crouched in silence as the sound of movement grew closer, the heavy tread of watcher boots, the soft hum of their technology. Mira tensed, about to speak. Kane placed a gentle finger against her lips, shaking his head. The child understood, pressing herself against her mother. The patrol passed just 20 yards from their hiding place. 3 watchers moving in tight formation, their bone-white skin almost glowing in the moonlight. They carried scanning devices that swept back and forth, searching for unauthorized life signs. Kane knew these standard patrols weren't specifically looking for them in him, not yet. But the scanners would detect any movement, any heat signature that didn't match the forest's natural patterns. They remained frozen for what seemed like an eternity until the patrol disappeared into the trees. Kane released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That was close, Lyra whispered. Too close, Kane agreed. We need to move faster. They continued through the forest, Kane leading them through increasingly difficult terrain, up steep inclines, through dense undergrowth, across shallow streams. The path was punishing, but it would throw off any trackers. As they navigated a particularly treacherous slope, Lyra slipped on the wet soil. She cried out, sliding several feet before managing to grab onto a root. Mira screamed as her mother nearly tumbled down the steep incline. Kane reacted instantly, scrambling down to where Lyra hung precariously over a 20-foot drop. He seized her arm just as the root began to give way. I've got you, he grunted, bracing himself against a tree trunk. With a heave, he pulled her up to safety. Lyra collapsed against him, breathing hard. Thank you, she gasped. Kane nodded, suddenly aware of how close they were. He could feel her heartbeat, rapid and strong. For a moment, neither moved. Then Kane stepped back. We should keep going, he said, his voice rougher than intended. We need to rest, Lyra finally said, as the first of the twin moons began to set. Kane nodded reluctantly. Just until dawn. They found shelter beneath the twisted roots of a massive tree. The vegetation here was unlike anything on Earth. Purple and blue instead of green, with strange phosphorescent fungi that glowed softly in the darkness. Kane settled with his back against the tree, keeping watch while Lyra and Mira huddled together for warmth. The night air had grown chill, and their ragged clothing offered little protection. What was Earth like? Mira asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Before the Watchers came? Kane tensed. No one had asked him about Earth in years, not since the early days of his captivity, when he'd still tried to bond with his fellow prisoners. It was beautiful, he said finally, his voice low. Different from here. Green forests, blue oceans, cities that stretched as far as you could see. Did you live in a city? Mira pressed, clearly fascinated. No, a small town near mountains. My wife and I had a house with a garden. My daughter loved to help plant flowers in the spring. What was her name? Mira asked. Kane's throat tightened. Ellie, he managed. She was 5 when they came. What happened to her? Mira's innocent question cut deep. Mira, Lyra warned. That's enough questions. It's okay, Kane said, though it wasn't. I don't know what happened to them. We were separated during the attack. The Watchers were taking some humans alive, especially children. I like to think. He couldn't finish the thought. The hope that Ellie and Sarah might still be alive somewhere had kept him going in the early days. But after 3 years of seeing how the Watchers treated their human captives, that hope had withered to almost nothing. They came at night, Kane continued, surprising himself. He rarely spoke of that day. Our town had no defenses, no warning. Their ships just appeared in the sky, hundreds of them, blocking out the stars. He stared into the darkness, seeing not the alien forest but the burning ruins of his home. Sarah, my wife, she grabbed Ellie and ran for the basement. I stayed behind, tried to buy them time. Stupid. I should have gone with them. He flexed his hand, remembering the weight of the shotgun he'd held. I fought until they stunned me. When I woke up, I was in a transport ship with others from the town. Never saw Sarah or Ellie again. Maybe they escaped, Mira suggested hopefully. Kane managed a thin smile. Maybe. Are you really going to Mira asked suddenly, changing the subject. Kane looked at her in surprise. She was more perceptive than he'd realized. Mira, her mother scolded. It's okay, Kane said, though it wasn't. Yes, without the antidote, the poison will kill me in about a week. Can't you get more of the medicine? Mira asked. Only the Watchers have it, Kane explained, and they won't exactly be offering it to me now. Then why did you help us? Kane was silent for a long moment. Because sometimes doing the right thing is more important than living. He didn't tell them about the nightmares, about the faces of all the people he'd hunted down for the Watchers. He didn't tell them about his real family, long dead or enslaved on Earth. He didn't tell them that in Mira's eyes, he'd seen a chance for redemption. Sleep, he said instead. Dawn comes quickly here. They woke to the sound of searchers. Kane came alert instantly, his hand already on his knife, the only weapon the Watchers had allowed him. He peered through the roots of their shelter and saw them. 2 Watcher scouts, tall and gaunt, with their characteristic bone-white skin and eyes like black pools of oil. They carried shock staves, primitive by their standards, but more than effective against unarmored fugitives. Stay here, he whispered to Lyra and Mira. Don't move, don't make a sound. He slipped out from their hiding place, moving silently through the underbrush. 3 years as a hunter had taught him patience and stealth. He circled behind the scouts, waiting for his moment. The Watchers moved with cold precision, scanning the forest floor for tracks. One carried a small device that Kane recognized, a biosensor tuned to neurophysiology. It would detect Lyra and Mira if they came within 20 yards of it. Kane picked up a stone and threw it far to his right. The sound of it crashing through the foliage drew the Watchers' attention. As they turned, Kane struck. The first Watcher died without a sound, Kane's knife slicing across its throat. The second turned, but too late. Kane was already upon it, driving the blade into its chest, where the primary heart lay. Black blood spilled over his hands as he lowered the body to the ground. He returned to find Lyra standing protectively in front of Mira, a sharp stone in her hand. It's done, he said, wiping his knife on the moss. But there will be more. We need to keep moving. You killed them, Mira said, her voice small. Kane met her gaze steadily. Yes, I did. They were bad, she said as if convincing herself. They were soldiers following orders, Kane corrected. But yes, they would have taken you and your mother back to the camps, or killed you for running. We should take their weapons, Lyra suggested. Kane shook his head. The staves are coded to their touch. They'd be useless to us, but we can take their supplies. He searched the bodies quickly, finding water containers and some form of dried meat. He didn't know if it would be safe for him to eat, but Lyra and Mira could use it. As he worked, Kane felt the first signs of the poison's deeper effects. A faint tremor in his hands, an ache in his bones. Without the antidote, the toxin would slowly shut down his organs, one by one. He'd seen it happen before, to hunters who'd failed their assignments. It wasn't a death he looked forward to. The poison, is it painful? Lyra asked quietly, as if reading his thoughts. Kane hesitated. It gets worse toward the end. The last day or two aren't pleasant. And there's nothing that can help? Nothing on this world as far as I know. Kane shouldered the water containers. We should go. These 2 will be missed soon. They set off deeper into the forest, moving faster now. The twin suns were rising, their light filtering through the canopy in shafts of gold and crimson. The forest began to thin, the massive trees giving way to smaller growth. The plains are ahead, Kane explained. Less cover, but faster travel. We'll need to be careful. Suddenly, a piercing shriek cut through the air. Kane spun around to see a massive winged creature diving toward them from the canopy. A forest raptor, its leathery wings spanning 12 feet, talons extended. Down, Kane shouted, shoving Lyra and Mira aside as the creature swooped past, its claws missing them by inches. The raptor banked sharply, preparing for another attack. Kane drew his knife, knowing it would be little use against such a predator. These creatures rarely hunted alone. As if confirming his fears, 2 more raptors appeared above the trees, drawn by the first one's hunting cry. There's a hollow trunk ahead, Kane said urgently. Get to it, now! Lyra grabbed Mira and ran toward the fallen tree Kane had spotted. The first raptor dived again, this time aiming directly for Kane. He waited until the last possible moment, then dropped flat as the creature passed overhead. In one fluid motion, he thrust his knife upward, catching the raptor's underbelly. It screeched in pain, crashing into the undergrowth several yards away. The other raptors circled warily now. Kane backed toward the hollow log where Lyra and Mira had taken shelter. One raptor landed on a branch above, studying him with predatory intelligence. The other continued to circle. Kane reached the log and backed inside, knife still raised. The space was tight, barely large enough for the three of them. The wounded raptor had regained its feet and was limping toward them, hissing with rage. Its companions landed nearby, waiting for an opportunity. "What do we do?" Lyra whispered, holding Mira tight against her. "Wait them out," Kane replied. "They're ambush hunters, not patient." For nearly an hour they remained in their shelter while the raptors prowled outside, occasionally testing the entrance only to be driven back by Kane's knife. Finally, as Kane had predicted, the predators lost interest and returned to the skies in search of easier prey. "How much farther to this settlement?" Lyra asked as they emerged and continued their journey. 5 days if we're lucky," Kane replied. He didn't mention that he could already feel the poison working deeper into his system. A dull ache had started in his bones, the first symptom. "And if we're not lucky?" Kane's gaze hardened. "Then we adapt. We survive. It's what humans do." By midday, they had reached the edge of a vast plain. The dark purple of the forest gave way to tall blue grass that rippled like water in the wind. In the distance, Kane could see the jagged mountains that marked their destination. "The settlement is there?" Lyra asked, following his gaze. Kane nodded. "In the mountains, hidden in caves the Watchers haven't found." "Who lives there?" "Humans, Nauru. Anyone who's escaped the Watchers and managed to stay free. They call it Haven." "How do you know about it if you're a hunter?" Lyra's voice held suspicion again. Kane's jaw tightened. "Because I've been hunting one of their leaders for the past year, a human named Marcus. He's led more escapes from the labor camps than anyone else." "And you never caught him?" A ghost of a smile crossed Kane's face. "No, I never caught him." "Why not?" Mira asked, looking up at him with curious eyes. Kane hesitated. "I told the Watchers he was too clever, that he covered his tracks too well." He looked out at the mountains. "The truth is, I didn't try as hard as I could have. Some part of me respected what he was doing." "You were already changing, even then," Lyra observed. Kane didn't reply. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps the seeds of rebellion had been planted long before Mira's plea had forced him to confront what he'd become. They started across the plain, keeping low in the grass. The terrain offered less cover than the forest, but they could move faster. The twin suns beat down mercilessly, and soon all three were drenched in sweat. The blue grass stretched nearly as tall as Kane in some places, creating a strange ocean-like landscape around them. Occasionally, small creatures would dart away from their approach, six-legged rodents with iridescent scales instead of fur. "What are those?" Mira asked, pointing at one as it scurried down. "The Nauru call them shikra," Kane replied. "They're harmless. Good eating, if you can catch them." "You speak our language?" Lyra asked, surprised. Kane nodded. "The Watchers made sure their hunters could communicate with all captive species. I know the basics." "Tarek would have been impressed," Lyra said softly. "He always said humans learn quickly." "Tarek?" "My husband, Mira's father." Lyra's eyes grew distant. "He studied your kind before the Watchers came. He was a scientist." As they moved through the tall grass, Kane suddenly stiffened. He lowered Mira to the ground and dropped to a crouch, signaling for them to do the same. "What is it?" Lyra whispered. "Hover, Scout," Kane breathed. "Don't move." Above them, barely visible against the purple sky, a small drone-like device hummed past. Kane had seen them many times, automated surveillance used by the Watchers to monitor the planes. They were equipped with thermal sensors and movement detectors, but had limited range. The drone hovered about 50 yards away, then began to circle back toward them. Kane cursed under his breath. "It's detected something," he whispered. "We need to move. Now." They broke into a run, keeping low in the grass. The drone adjusted course, following them. Kane knew it would be broadcasting their position to the nearest Watcher patrol. There, he pointed to a cluster of large boulders jutting from the plain. Head for the rocks. They sprinted toward the formation, the drone gaining on them. As they reached the rocks, Kane grabbed a heavy stone. Get behind the boulders, he ordered. Keep going once I've dealt with this. The drone closed in, hovering just 10 feet above them. Kane waited for it to descend slightly, then hurled the stone with all his strength. It struck true, hitting the drone's main sensor array. The machine wobbled, sparks flying from its damaged components. Kane grabbed another stone and threw again. This time the drone spiraled out of control, crashing into the ground 20 feet away. He ran to it, smashing the remains with a boulder until he was certain it couldn't transmit their location. That bought us some time, he said, returning to Lyra and Mira. But they'll send more when this one doesn't report back. Mira began to lag behind. Without a word, Kane lifted her onto his shoulders. She was light, too light, he thought. The labor camps didn't feed their workers well, especially not children. Tell me about Earth, Mira said, her small hands holding onto his head for balance. Kane stiffened. No one had asked him about Earth in years. It's different from here, he said finally. The sky is blue, not purple. The grass is green, not blue. There's only one sun and one moon. Sounds boring, Mira declared, and Kane found himself laughing for the first time in years. I suppose it might seem that way, he admitted. Did you have a family there? Mira asked innocently. Kane's laughter died. Yes, once. What happened to them? Mira, Lyra warned, don't ask such things. It's all right, Kane said, though his voice had grown tight. They were taken in the first wave of the invasion. My wife, my daughter. She would be about your age now. I'm sorry, Mira said, patting his head as if to comfort him. So am I, Kane replied softly. They continued in silence after that, pushing through the tall grass as the day wore on. By late afternoon, they'd covered impressive ground, but Kane knew they were still being pursued. The Watchers wouldn't give up easily, not on him, not on escapees, and certainly not now that he'd killed 2 of their scouts. His suspicion was confirmed when they crested a small rise and he saw, far behind them, a dust cloud on the horizon. Skimmers, he said grimly. They're bringing in the heavy hunters. Lyra's face paled to a sickly yellow-green. We can't outrun skimmers. No, Kane agreed, but we can outsmart them. He scanned the plain ahead and spotted what he needed, a narrow ravine cutting through the grassland, invisible until you were nearly upon it. It was a feature he'd used before in previous hunts. This way, he said, changing their course. Quickly. They reached the ravine just as the whine of the skimmers became audible. Kane helped Lyra and Mira down the steep walls, then followed them into the shadowy depths. The ravine was narrow enough that the tall grass above partly concealed it, but wide enough for them to move through single file. As they scrambled down, loose rocks gave way beneath Mira's feet. She slipped with a cry, tumbling down the steep incline. Kane lunged, catching her arm before she could fall to the jagged rocks below, but the sudden movement sent pain shooting through his poison-weakened muscles. He gritted his teeth, pulling her to safety. Are you hurt? He asked, checking her quickly. Mira shook her head, eyes wide with fear. I'm okay. We need to keep moving, Kane said, helping her up. Quietly now. Where does this lead? Lyra whispered as they hurried along the rocky bottom. There's a river about 2 miles ahead, Kane explained. We can follow it underground for a while. The water will mask our scent, and the ravine will hide us from their scanners. The sound of the skimmers grew louder, then passed directly overhead. Kane held his breath, one hand on Mira's shoulder to keep her still. Moments later, the noise faded as the vehicles continued their search in the wrong direction. They'll realize their mistake eventually, Kane said, but it buys us time. They continued through the ravine, which grew deeper and darker as they progressed. Soon, they could hear the sound of rushing water ahead. I'm thirsty, Mira complained. We'll drink soon, Kane promised. The ravine walls around them were streaked with strange mineral deposits, veins of blue-green crystal that caught and reflected what little light filtered down from above. In places, the formation narrowed so much they had to turn sideways to squeeze through. The Watchers mine these crystals, Kane explained, touching one of the veins. That's why they established labor camps here. The crystals power their technology. That's what Tarek was researching, Lyra said. He believed the crystals could be used for more than weapons and ships. He thought they might have healing properties. Did he prove it? Kane asked. Lyra shook her head. The Watchers came before he could complete his work, but he managed to hide his research. He always hoped someone would find it, continue where he left off. A rumbling sound echoed through the ravine, making them all freeze. The ground beneath their feet trembled slightly. "What was that?" Lyra asked, clutching Mira close. "Rock slide," Kane said, looking up at the ravine walls. "Or—" The rumbling grew louder. A cascade of small stones showered down from above. "Run!" Kane shouted, grabbing Mira's hand. "Now!" They sprinted forward as larger rocks began to fall. The ravine was collapsing, whether from natural causes or Watcher interference. Kane couldn't tell. All that mattered was getting to safety. A massive boulder crashed down just yards behind them. The impact knocked Kane off his feet. He rolled, coming up quickly, but pain lanced through his side. One of the falling rocks had struck him. "Kane," Lyra called, turning back. "Keep going," he ordered, staggering to his feet. "I'm right behind you." They ran through the increasingly narrow passage, dust and debris filling the air. Ahead, Kane could see where the ravine widened again, near the underground river. If they could reach that point. With a final surge of effort, they burst into the wider section just as the last of the rockfalls sealed the passage behind them. They collapsed onto the riverbank, gasping for breath. "That was too close," Lyra said between breaths. Kane nodded, wincing as he probed his side. His ribs were bruised, possibly cracked, but nothing he couldn't handle. The poison in his system was a far greater concern. The exertion had accelerated its effects. His vision blurred briefly, and he blinked to clear it. When they reached the river, they found it flowing swiftly through a series of underground tunnels. The water was clear and cold, and they all drank deeply before continuing their journey. Kane felt the next symptom of the poison begin as they waded into the water, a burning sensation in his veins, as if his blood were slowly turning to fire. He gritted his teeth against it. 4 more days to Haven. He could last that long. He had to. They followed the underground river for hours, wading through cold water that sometimes reached their waists. Mira rode on her mother's shoulders now, while Kane led the way, testing each step in the uncertain light that filtered down from occasional openings in the cavern ceiling. The poison was making him clumsy. Twice he stumbled, the second time nearly falling completely into the swift current. Lyra caught his arm the second time, her strength surprising him. "You're getting worse," she said quietly. Kane didn't deny it. The tremors in his hands were more pronounced now, and the burning in his veins had spread to his chest. "I've seen this before," he admitted. "The withdrawal, it gets worse before the end." "How much worse?" Lyra asked, concern evident in her voice. Kane looked away. "You don't want to know." They continued in silence, the only sound the rushing of the water and Mira's occasional questions about the strange formations they passed. Kane focused on putting one foot in front of the other, fighting the growing weakness in his limbs. The underground river took a sharp turn, widening into a subterranean pool. Kane paused, studying the area. Light streamed down from a large opening above, illuminating the chamber in a soft blue glow. "We can rest here," he decided. "Climb out, dry off." They made their way to a rocky shelf near the water's edge. Kane helped Lyra and Mira up, then hauled himself onto the ledge, his muscles protesting the effort. "Look," Mira whispered, pointing across the pool. Kane turned to see what had caught her attention. On the far side of the chamber, a series of markings covered the wall, not natural formations, but deliberate etchings. "Naru script," Lyra breathed. "Ancient sacred symbols." Kane squinted, trying to make out the details. "What do they say?" "They tell of the world before," Lyra explained, her voice reverent. "Before the Watchers, their protection symbols, markers for travelers." "Does that mean others have used this route?" Kane asked. "Recently?" Lyra shook her head. "These are very old, but they're a good sign. My people believe such markers bring luck to those who follow the ancient paths." "We could use some luck," Kane muttered. They rested longer than Kane would have liked, but he knew Lyra and Mira needed it. While they slept, huddled together for warmth, he kept watch, fighting the increasing pain of the poison. The burning in his veins had intensified, spreading from his chest to his abdomen. Soon it would reach his vital organs. Kane had seen the progression before in other hunters who'd been denied the antidote as punishment. By the 5th day, the pain would be unbearable. By the 6th, organ failure would begin. The 7th, if he lasted that long, would bring merciful death. He glanced at Lyra and Mira, sleeping peacefully despite everything. They still had 4 days of travel ahead, assuming they weren't recaptured. Kane was beginning to doubt he'd make it that far. The poison was working faster than he'd anticipated, perhaps accelerated by the physical exertion. As the hours passed, Kane found himself drifting in and out of consciousness. In his feverish dreams, he saw Sarah and Ellie reaching for him across an impossible distance. He saw the faces of those he'd hunted, those he'd returned to captivity. And he saw Mira looking at him with those trusting eyes, somehow believing he was better than he knew himself to be. He woke with a start to find Lyra kneeling beside him, her cool hand on his forehead. "You're burning up," she said, concern evident in her voice. Kane tried to respond, but his tongue felt thick, unwieldy. The poison was progressing faster than he'd anticipated. "Can you stand?" Lyra asked. With her help, Kane managed to get to his feet, though the world swam alarmingly around him. "I don't think I can make it much further," he admitted, the words difficult to form. "You have to," Lyra insisted. "Mira and I can't find haven without you." Kane nodded weakly. She was right. He had to keep going, at least until they were close enough for Lyra to find the way on her own. They continued their journey following the underground river until they found a side passage that sloped upward. The climb was steep, the rocks slippery with moss and moisture. Kane went first, helping Lyra and Mira navigate the difficult sections, though each movement cost him dearly in pain and energy. By the time they reached the surface, the suns were setting, casting long shadows across the plain. They had made good progress. The mountains were noticeably closer now, their jagged peaks stark against the darkening sky. "We'll rest here for a bit," Kane said, finding a spot where the riverbank formed a natural hollow, sheltered by overhanging rocks. Lyra helped Mira out of her wet clothes and spread them to dry while Kane kept watch. The burning in his veins had intensified, and he found himself clenching and unclenching his fists to distract from the pain. "You're getting worse," Lyra observed quietly once Mira had fallen asleep. Kane didn't deny it. "It doesn't matter. We keep moving. There's really no way to get the antidote." "The Watchers keep it closely guarded. Only their chief physicians can dispense it." Lyra was silent for a moment. "My husband was a healer before the Watchers came. He taught me some things. Perhaps I could—" "No," Kane interrupted. "There's no cure for this poison except their antidote. But thank you." She studied him with eyes that seemed to see too much. "Why are you really helping us, Kane? The truth this time." Kane looked away, watching the river flow past. "When I was captured, I fought. We all did. But the Watchers, they have ways of breaking people. Bit by bit, they stripped away everything that made me human. Everything except survival." He touched his neck, where the collar had been. "The poison was insurance, but after a while I didn't need it. I hunted for them because it was easier than resisting. Because I'd forgotten what I was fighting for." His gaze drifted to Mira's sleeping form. "And then your daughter looked at me and saw something I thought was long dead. She reminded me of what it means to be human, of what we're supposed to protect." Lyra reached out hesitantly, then placed her hand on his arm. "Thank you." Kane nodded, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "We should move again soon. The Watchers won't search at night. Even they fear what comes out after dark on this world. But we need to put more distance behind us." As if summoned by his words, a haunting cry echoed across the plain. It was answered by another closer. "Night hunters," Kane explained, reaching for his knife. "We need to find better shelter." The night hunters were one of the few native predators the Watchers hadn't managed to subjugate. Six-limbed with blue-black fur, they hunted in packs and could bring down prey 3 times their size. Their howls grew closer as Kane led Lyra and Mira away from the river, searching for a defensible position. They found it in a cluster of rock formations that jutted from the plain like broken teeth. Kane helped Lyra and Mira climb to a narrow ledge, then positioned himself at the only approach, knife ready. "What if there are too many?" Lyra whispered, holding Mira close. "Then we climb higher," Kane replied. "They're not good climbers. Too top-heavy." The first hunter appeared as the last light faded from the sky. Its eyes glowed yellow in the darkness, reflecting the light of the rising moons. It prowled around the base of the rocks, testing for weaknesses, calling to its pack. Soon there were 5 of them, circling and growling. Cain remained motionless, conserving his strength. The poison made his vision blur at the edges, but he forced himself to focus. When they attacked, they came all at once, a coordinated assault that spoke of intelligence as well as instinct. Cain met the first with his knife, driving the blade deep into its throat. The second and third leaped past him, heading for Lyra and Mira. Lyra screamed and swung a rock at one, catching it across the snout. It fell back, but the other lunged for Mira. Cain abandoned his position, scrambling up the rocks. He caught the creature by its hind legs and yanked it backward. Its claws scrabbled for purchase as it fell, catching Cain across the chest. He ignored the pain and drove his knife into its belly. The remaining hunters retreated, but Cain knew they wouldn't go far. He climbed up to where Lyra held Mira, both of them trembling. "Are you hurt?" he asked, examining them quickly. "No," Lyra answered, "but you are." Cain looked down at his chest. The creature's claws had left 4 deep gashes across his torso. Blood seeped through his torn shirt. "It's nothing," he said, though he knew any wound would heal slower now, with the poison in his system. Lyra tore strips from the bottom of her tunic. "Let me bind it at least." Cain submitted to her ministrations, too tired to argue. The attack had drained what little strength he had. As Lyra worked, he found himself studying her face, the delicate structure beneath the green skin, the determined set of her jaw. She was beautiful, in her alien way. "Why did you run?" he asked suddenly. "From the camp. Most don't even try." Lyra's hands stilled for a moment. They were going to take Mira away, to the breeding program. Cain's blood ran cold. He'd heard rumors of such things but had never confirmed them. "They're trying to create hybrids," Lyra continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nauru children with human attributes, stronger, more resilient, better slaves. And they wanted Mira." Lyra nodded, tears in her eyes. Her father was half human. The Watchers didn't know when they took him, but when they found out, she trailed off. "What was his name?" Cain asked gently. "Tarek," Lyra said, her voice softening. "He was a scientist, studying the plant life in the northern mountains when the Watchers first came. His father was human, one of the first explorers to our world. His mother was Nauru." "He resisted them?" Lyra's face showed pride through her grief. "Until the end. He organized the first escapes from the labor camps, taught others how to disable the security systems. When they caught him, he refused to give up any names, even under torture." Cain understood now why this particular escape had warranted his attention. The Watchers wouldn't just want Mira back. They would want her intact, unharmed, a valuable specimen. "We should rest while we can," he said, changing the subject. "I'll take first watch." "You need to rest more than we do," Lyra argued. "The poison is doing what it's going to do, regardless of whether I sleep or not," Cain finished for her. "Rest, Lyra. I'll wake you in a few hours." He positioned himself where he could see both the approach to their shelter and the plain beyond. The night hunters still prowled below, but they were keeping their distance for now. In the eerie light of the twin moons, the landscape took on an otherworldly beauty, the blue grass silver-tipped, the distant mountains stark against the star-filled sky. Cain allowed himself a moment of regret. This world could have been remarkable to explore under different circumstances. Now he would see only a fraction of it before the poison claimed him. Beside him, Lyra settled Mira against her side, humming softly until the child drifted off to sleep. The tune was unfamiliar but soothing, and Cain found himself listening intently. "What's that song?" he asked when she finished. "An old Nauru lullaby," Lyra replied, "about the journey of the soul after death." "Cheery bedtime story," Cain remarked dryly. Lyra smiled faintly. "Our beliefs are different from yours. We don't fear death as humans seem to. We see it as transformation, not ending." "And what do you transform into?" "Energy, light, part of the world soul." She looked up at the stars. "When we die, we join with everything." Cain considered this. That's not so different from some human beliefs. "Perhaps we're not so different after all," Lyra suggested. "Perhaps not," Cain agreed, though he knew the Watchers exploited those differences all the same. They fell silent after that. Eventually, Lyra's breathing deepened as she too succumbed to exhaustion. Cain remained vigilant, fighting against his own fatigue and the ever-present burn of the poison. By the time the first moon began to set, the night hunters had moved on to easier prey. Cain woke Lyra gently. "We should go," he said. "Use the moonlight while we can." They continued their journey across the plain, moving more cautiously now in the dark. Mira walked between them, one hand in her mother's, one in Cain's. Despite everything, the child seemed to trust him completely. Cain checked their direction against the stars, another skill the Watchers had taught him for hunting. 3 more days to Haven, if they maintained this pace. The burning in his veins had spread to his joints now, making each step an exercise in willpower. By dawn, they'd reached the foothills of the mountains. The blue grass gave way to rocky terrain, dotted with strange, twisted trees that reminded Cain of bonsai, only massive in scale. Their gnarled branches provided welcome shade as the twin suns rose. "Are we getting close?" Mira asked, her small face hopeful. "Closer," Cain said, not wanting to discourage her. "But we still have a long way to go." They rested briefly in the shade of one of the larger trees. Cain distributed the last of the water from the Watcher Scouts' containers. "We'll need to find more soon," he said. "There should be streams in the foothills." Lyra nodded, then suddenly tensed, looking past him. "Cain," she whispered. He turned to see what had alarmed her. At first he saw nothing, but then a flash of movement caught his eye. A patrol of Watchers, moving through the foothills, about half a mile away. "Down," he hissed, pulling Mira behind the trunk of the tree. They watched as the patrol moved methodically through the area, clearly searching. Cain counted 6 Watchers, all armed with shock staves and tracking devices. "They're following our trail from the river," he muttered. "We need to split up." "No," Lyra protested. "Listen to me," Cain insisted. "I'll lead them away. You and Mira head straight for those peaks." He pointed to a distinctive formation in the mountains ahead. "There's a pass between them. Follow it until you reach a waterfall. Behind the waterfall is a cave entrance. That's one way into Haven." "How will you find us?" Cain didn't answer, and understanding dawned in Lyra's eyes. "You don't intend to," she said flatly. "I was never going to make it to Haven," Cain reminded her. "But I can buy you time." "No," Mira said, grabbing his hand. "You have to come with us. You promised to take us to the safe place." Cain knelt before her. "Sometimes promises have to change, little one, but I'll make you a new one. I promise your mother will get you safely to Haven." Tears welled in Mira's large eyes. "But what about you?" Cain forced a smile. "I'll be joining the world's soul, like your father, becoming part of everything." Mira threw her arms around his neck, hugging him fiercely. Cain hesitated, then returned the embrace, something breaking and healing simultaneously within him. "Take this," he said, pressing his knife into Lyra's hand. "Follow the pass. Don't stop for anything." Lyra's fingers closed around the weapon. "Thank you, Cain, for everything." He nodded once, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in his throat. Then he turned and moved away from them, deliberately making noise, leaving clear tracks. When he was far enough away, he shouted and waved his arms. The Watcher patrol spotted him immediately and changed course, pursuing him as he'd intended. Cain ran, leading them deeper into the foothills, away from Lyra and Mira's path to Haven. The poison made his legs feel like lead, his lungs burned with each breath, but he pushed on. 1 mile. 2. The Watchers followed relentlessly, gaining ground. Cain scrambled up a rocky slope, dislodging stones that clattered down behind him. At the top, he found himself at the edge of a steep ravine. Across it, he could see more of the twisted trees, offering potential cover, if he could reach them. The first shock stave blast hit the ground near his feet. Cain dove to the side as another sizzled past his ear. The Watchers were close now, spreading out to surround him. Cain assessed his options. The ravine was too wide to jump across. Going back wasn't an option. Fighting 6 armed Watchers with no weapons was suicide. But then, he was already dying. Cain charged the nearest Watcher, ducking under its shock stave and driving his shoulder into its midsection. They went down together, rolling in the dust. Cain got his hands around the creature's neck and squeezed with all his remaining strength. The other Watchers surrounded him, but held back, unwilling to risk hitting their comrade. When the watcher beneath him finally went limp, Kane grabbed its shock stave and swung it in a wide arc, keeping the others at bay. "Surrender, human," one of them said in the stilted way they had of speaking Earth languages. "You cannot escape." Kane laughed, a harsh sound. "I'm already free." He lunged at the speaker, driving the shock stave into its chest. Electricity arced through the watcher's body, dropping it to the ground. Kane whirled to face the next, but pain exploded in his back as another watcher landed a hit. Kane fell to his knees, muscles spasming from the shock. The burning of the poison intensified, as if the electricity had accelerated its effects. His vision tunneled, darkness creeping in from the edges. With his last strength, Kane hurled himself at the nearest watcher, taking them both over the edge of the ravine. They fell together, the watcher's inhuman scream mingling with the wind rushing past Kane's ears. Impact came suddenly, violently. Pain flared across Kane's consciousness, then receded as numbness spread through his broken body. Above, he could see the remaining watchers peering down at him. One raised a communicator to its lipless mouth, presumably calling for retrieval. Kane smiled. Even now, they wanted him alive, wanted to study him, to understand why their perfect hunter had turned on them. They wouldn't get the chance. He could feel the poison completing its work, shutting down his systems one by one. His heartbeat slowed. His breathing grew shallow. As consciousness began to fade, Kane thought he saw a small green face peering at him from behind a rock nearby. Mira? No, impossible. She and Lyra should be miles away by now, heading for the pin. Just a hallucination then, a product of his dying brain. "Run," he whispered to the vision. "Be free." The world dimmed, colors bleeding away. Kane's last thought was of Earth, of blue skies and green grass, of his wife's smile and his daughter's laughter, of home. Then darkness claimed him, and Kane knew no more. Lyra and Mira reached the waterfall as the second sun began to set. They traveled without stopping, driven by fear and Kane's final instructions. Now they stood before the curtain of water, soaked by its spray. "Is this really the way?" Mira asked, clinging to her mother's hand. Lyra squeezed her daughter's fingers reassuringly. Kane said it was. Together they stepped through the waterfall into the darkness beyond. For a moment there was nothing but cold water and blind terror. Then hands reached out, grabbing them, pulling them forward into a dry cave. Lyra blinked water from her eyes and found herself facing a group of humans and Nauru, all armed with primitive but effective weapons: bows, spears, knives. "Who are you?" demanded a tall human man with a scar running down one side of his face. "How did you find this entrance?" "Kane sent us," Lyra explained, her voice breaking on his name. "He was a hunter, but he helped us escape." The man's expression changed. "Kane? The Watcher's prize bloodhound?" Lyra nodded. "He removed his collar, sacrificed himself so we could get here." The man studied them for a long moment, then his face softened. "I'm Marcus. Welcome to Haven." As they were led deeper into the cave system, Mira looked back toward the waterfall entrance. "Will Kane be all right, Mother?" she asked. Lyra thought of the poison, of the Watcher patrol, of Kane's grim determination. "He found his way back to himself, Mira. That's what matters." "I wish he could have come with us." "So do I," Lyra admitted, surprising herself with the depth of her feeling. "But he gave us a chance at freedom. The best way to honor him is to use it well." Marcus showed them to a small chamber where other Nauru families had made their home. There was food, clean water, and for the first time in years, a sense of safety. That night, as Mira slept curled against her side, Lyra gazed up at the rough cave ceiling and thought of Kane, of his struggle to reclaim his humanity, of his sacrifice. In the Nauru tradition, she whispered the words that would help guide his spirit to join the world soul. From darkness to light, from separation to unity. Your journey ends, your transformation begins. Be at peace, Kane of Earth, be free. Miles away, under the light of the twin moons, Kane's body lay broken at the bottom of the ravine. But perhaps some part of him heard her words, for as the last breath left his body, a strange peace settled over his features. And for the first time in 3 years, he looked truly human again. 3 days later, a Watcher patrol brought Kane's body back to their compound for study. They were particularly interested in how he had managed to remove the control collar without triggering the full toxin release. Such knowledge could be dangerous if it spread among their other human hunters. The chief physician performed the autopsy personally, cutting into Kane's cold flesh with clinical precision. What he found puzzled him greatly. The toxin had indeed been released into Kane's system, but not all at once as should have happened. More curious still were the other findings, signs of a prolonged internal struggle that made no sense to the watcher's rational mind. Subject's cellular structure shows evidence of regeneration fighting against the toxin's effects, he noted in his report, impossible by our understanding of human physiology. Later, when the body was disposed of in the compound's incinerator, no one noticed the small green-skinned child watching from the shadows. No one saw her place her tiny hand against the viewing window, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," Mira whispered. "I'll remember." She slipped away as silently as she had come, returning to the hidden entrance that would take her back to Haven, to her mother Lara, to Marcus, to freedom. In her pocket was a small object she had taken from Kane's body before the Watchers found him, a battered metal disc that he had kept hidden in his boot, a photograph of a woman and a child, his family from Earth. Mira would keep it safe. She would remember the human who had found his humanity again. And someday when the time was right, she would tell others of Kane's sacrifice, of how one man's choice had sparked something that would eventually grow into a revolution. But that was a story for another day. For now, Mira simply ran toward freedom, carrying Kane's legacy with her into the future he would never see, but had died to create.